My grandma, Eleanor May Carter, was the warmest soul I had ever known. She lived in a little white house on Maplewood Street in a small Illinois town where everybody knew everybody. Her garden always smelled like lavender, and the kitchen was filled with the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls every Saturday morning. When I was a kid, she'd call me Sunshine, because, according to her, I could light up any room just by walking in. Growing up, I spent more time at her place than I did at my own home. My parents were always busy. Mom worked double shifts as a nurse, and Dad's job kept him on the road. Grandma filled in the gaps. She taught me how to bake pies, how to sew a button, and how to listen when someone's heart was heavy. She was the kind of person who left little notes in your lunch bag and always remembered the name of your friend's dog. So when the call came that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep at 84, I felt something inside me crack. The funeral was on a chilly Thursday morning in late October. The leaves had turned to golden red, and the air carried that sharp edge of winter's approach. People from all over town came to pay their respects. The church was so full that some had to stand in the back. Everyone had a story about Eleanor, how she'd dropped off soup when they were sick, how she'd babysat their kids for free, how she'd given away her last loaf of bread to someone in need. I sat in the front pew with my mom, Aunt Linda, and Uncle Robert. My hands were clasped tightly together, and I stared at the casket, unable to believe the woman inside was the same one who had laughed so hard last Christmas she'd spilled hot cocoa on her sweater. After the burial, my family gathered at her house for the last time. It was strange being there without her voice greeting us at the door. The kitchen felt hollow without the sound of the kettle whistling. Everything was too still. Mom and Aunt Linda started talking about cleaning out the house so it could eventually be sold. It felt too soon to me, but Aunt Linda said she couldn't bear the idea of letting the place sit empty for months. I volunteered to start in the basement. The basement had always been a bit of a mystery to me. Grandma didn't let me play down there when I was little, saying it was too cluttered and dusty. Even as I got older, she would change the subject whenever I asked what was in the far corner behind the old washer and dryer. When I walked down the creaky steps that day, the air felt cooler, heavier. Boxes were stacked high along the walls, labeled in her tidy handwriting, Christmas decorations, winter coats, mason jars. There were shelves of canned peaches and jars of homemade pickles, and the scent of cedar lingered in the corners. I moved some boxes aside, and that's when I saw it. A large, old-fashioned wooden trunk sat against the far wall, half hidden under a faded quilt. It had brass corners and a heavy iron lock. The wood was scratched and dented, as if it had been through decades of travel. It struck me instantly. This must have been the one thing Grandma had never let me touch. "Hey, Mom," I called up the stairs. "Do you know what's in this trunk?" A moment later, Mom appeared at the top of the steps, her face pale. She came down slowly, brushing dust off her jeans. "That was your grandma's. She never told us what was inside. I think she had the only key. Do you think we should open it?" I asked. Aunt Linda appeared behind her, shaking her head. "We should probably just leave it. Whatever's in there, she clearly didn't want anyone to see." But my curiosity had already taken root. Grandma had told me everything, at least, I thought she had. She was my safe place, my best friend. What could possibly be in that trunk that she didn't want anyone to find? Mom sighed and pulled a ring of keys from her pocket. "She gave me these years ago in case of an emergency. I don't know if one will fit, but maybe it's time." The three of us knelt in front of the trunk. I tried a few keys before one clicked. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of letters tied with a ribbon, their paper yellowed with age. Beneath them was a small box, and next to it, an old Polaroid photograph. I picked up the photo first. It showed Grandma, maybe in her 20s, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes looked afraid. I glanced at Mom. She was staring at the picture, her mouth slightly open. "That's not Grandpa," she whispered. Aunt Linda pulled out one of the letters and unfolded it carefully. Her hands shook as she read. Then she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and dread. Oh my God, she said softly. She, she was married before. And she never told us. My heart pounded. Married before? My grandma? That alone was shocking. But I had the sinking feeling there was more to it than that. The man in the picture had a strange intensity in his eyes, something that made my stomach knot. I picked up the small box. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished with age. I pressed the clasp and it popped open, revealing two tiny photos inside, one of Grandma and one of a little boy I'd never seen before. The room went silent. Who is he? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. Somewhere deep inside me, I knew we had just opened the door to something that would change everything we thought we knew about her. And maybe even about ourselves. And as I held that locket in my palm, I realized one thing. My grandma had lived a life we had never truly known, and the truth was buried in the dusty letters now sitting in front of us. The letters were bound with a faded blue ribbon, the kind Grandma used to tie around jars of jam when she gave them as gifts. My hands felt heavy as I untied it, as if the ribbon itself was the last barrier keeping her secrets safe. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and something older, almost metallic. Each letter was dated, starting in 1962, long before my mom or Aunt Linda were born. The handwriting was hers, graceful, looping script, but the tone was unfamiliar, almost hesitant. I glanced at Mom and Aunt Linda. Mom's jaw was tight, and Aunt Linda was hugging herself as if to keep warm. I read aloud from the first letter. Dear Anna, I know I promised never to write you, but I cannot keep the weight of this to myself. Every day I live here, I feel the eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to slip. You told me once that secrets rot if you bury them too deep. I fear mine has already begun to decay, and I am the one crumbling with it. I stopped, my throat tight. Grandma didn't talk like that. The Eleanor I knew was open, joyful. This sounded like someone trapped. The next few lines made the air in the basement feel even heavier. He is not the man I thought he was. I am afraid, Anna. I am afraid of what he will do when he learns I am carrying his child. I don't want this life anymore, but I cannot see a way out. I looked up. Mom's face had gone pale. She was pregnant, she whispered. With someone who isn't Grandpa, I said, though my voice faltered. Aunt Linda reached for another letter. This one dated 6 months later. Anna, I left. I had to. He would have killed me if I stayed. I am somewhere safe for now, but I had to make a choice I can barely live with. My son. My sweet little boy. I had to give him up. I pray he is with a kind family. I pray he never knows the darkness from which I took him. The words blurred on the page as my eyes stung with tears. Grandma had a son. My mom and Aunt Linda had an older half-brother they'd never known about. Why didn't she tell us? Aunt Linda asked, her voice breaking. Why would she keep something like this a secret? Mom was quiet for a long time before she finally said, maybe she thought it was safer if we didn't know. Whoever that man was, she was terrified of him. I sifted through the letters, searching for anything that might explain who the man in the photograph was. There were hints, mentions of his temper, of things he did when no one was looking, but never a name. It was as if she had deliberately erased his identity, even from her private writings. Finally, I reached a letter from 1965. Anna, I think he has found me. I saw a man outside the grocery store today, just standing there, staring at me. I don't know if it was him, but my heart nearly stopped. I am moving again. I can't risk him finding out about the girls. The girls, I realized, meant my mom and Aunt Linda. She had written this after she remarried and had them. She had been afraid their whole childhood that this man might come back. Aunt Linda sat down hard on an old wooden stool. So, all those times she told us not to walk home alone, or when she made sure the doors were locked. It wasn't just because she was cautious. Mom nodded slowly. She was protecting us. From him. The thought made my skin crawl. All my life, I'd thought of Grandma as simply a gentle, giving soul. I'd never imagined she'd lived with fear shadowing her every step. I picked up the small box again, the one with the locket. I opened it once more, staring at the little boy's face. He had light hair and wide, curious eyes. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old. I wonder what happened to him, I said quietly. Aunt Linda looked away. If she gave him up for adoption, maybe he never knew about us. Maybe he had a good life. But something deep inside me whispered that it wasn't that simple. If it had been a clean break, why keep his picture? Why hide it in a locked trunk instead of burning it? I pulled out another letter, one of the last in the stack. Anna. I thought I could live without knowing, but I was wrong. I hired someone to look for him. I just needed to see if he was happy. But what I found, Anna, it is worse than I feared. He is not safe. And it is my fault. A shiver ran down my spine. Mom's voice was almost a whisper. What does she mean? Not safe. I turned the letter over, but there was nothing else, just her name, signed shakily at the bottom. We sat there in silence for a while. The letters spread out around us like pieces of a puzzle missing its most important parts. Finally, Aunt Linda said, "We need to know the whole story. There must be someone in town who remembers her back then, before she married Dad. Someone who knew him." Mom hesitated, then nodded. Maybe Mrs. Hensley would know. She and Mom were friends since they were teenagers. I wasn't sure what scared me more, finding out who the man in the photograph was, or learning what had happened to the little boy in the locket. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever truth we uncovered next would change everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman I'd loved my whole life, the one who had tucked me into bed and told me everything was going to be okay. And now I knew she'd been carrying this fear, this guilt, for decades. In the dark, I held the locket in my hand and made myself a promise. I would find out who that little boy was, what happened to him, and why my grandma had been so afraid. Even if the truth broke my heart. The next morning, the air was heavy with the kind of gray sky that made the world feel quieter. Mom, Aunt Linda, and I piled into Mom's old Toyota and drove across town to visit Mrs. Hensley. She was one of Grandma's oldest friends, maybe the only person still alive who had known her before she became Mrs. Carter. Mrs. Hensley's house was a weathered two-story with peeling white paint and wind chimes that sang softly in the cold breeze. She answered the door wearing a thick cardigan and a look of concern when she saw us standing there. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, ushering us inside. Eleanor was a treasure. We sat in her living room, the smell of peppermint tea drifting in from the kitchen. Mom got straight to the point. "Mrs. Hensley, we found something in Mom's basement. Letters. Old ones. And a photograph." Mrs. Hensley's eyes flickered with something I couldn't place, recognition, maybe even fear. Mom hesitated before pulling the photograph from her purse. "Do you know this man?" Mrs. Hensley took the picture with trembling hands. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I was hoping I'd never see his face again," she said finally. The silence that followed felt heavy. "Who was he?" I asked. She looked at me with eyes that had seen far too much. "His name was Daniel Harper. Your grandmother met him when she was just 18. He was older by almost 10 years. Handsome, charming, and dangerous." Mom's brows furrowed. "Dangerous how?" Mrs. Hensley took a deep breath. "He had a temper. Everyone knew it, but back then, people didn't talk about those things openly. Eleanor fell for him fast, and before long, they were married. She thought she could change him. But Daniel was cruel, controlling. He didn't just want to be her husband. He wanted to own her." I thought about the letters, about her writing that she was afraid. "Did he ever hurt her?" I asked softly. Mrs. Hensley's voice dropped. "More times than she told anyone. She came to me once with a bruise on her cheek and a split lip, saying she'd fallen. But I knew better. I begged her to leave him. She said she couldn't. She was pregnant. The boy in the locket." "And after the baby was born?" Aunt Linda asked. Mrs. Hensley's gaze shifted to the window, as if looking back through time. Things got worse. Daniel's temper. It didn't stop with her. She was afraid for the baby. She told me once that he'd held the boy too tightly during an argument, made him cry until he couldn't breathe. That was when she started planning to leave. I felt a cold shiver travel down my spine. How did she get away? Mom asked. It wasn't easy. Back then, a woman leaving her husband was scandalous, especially with a child. But Eleanor found a way. She disappeared one night while Daniel was out drinking. She took the boy and stayed with me for a few weeks. She was determined to start over. Then why? Why give him up? I asked, my throat tight. Mrs. Hensley hesitated. Daniel found them. Showed up at my door one night, pounding until the glass rattled. I told Eleanor to hide, but she knew it wouldn't work forever. She decided to disappear completely, but she believed he would always come after her if she kept the boy. So she made the hardest choice I've ever seen anyone make. She arranged for a private adoption through a couple she trusted. And then she left town. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Mom's voice was soft. Do you know who adopted him? Mrs. Hensley shook her head. She never told me their names. I think it was safer that way for everyone. But I know she regretted it every day of her life. She carried his picture in that locket for a reason. I thought about the last letter we'd read, the one where she said she'd found him and that he wasn't safe. Do you know if Daniel ever found the boy? I asked. Mrs. Hensley's expression darkened. I don't know. Daniel left town a few years after Eleanor did. Rumor was he'd gotten into trouble in another state. But Daniel Harper was the kind of man who didn't forget a grudge. If he had found that boy, I can't imagine it would have ended well. A heavy knot formed in my chest. We thanked Mrs. Hensley and left, but the whole drive home felt unreal. I couldn't stop replaying her words. Dangerous, cruel, controlling. This man had been my grandmother's first husband. He could have been my mother's father if things had gone differently. Back at the house, I sat in the living room with the letter spread out in front of me again. Now that I knew his name, Daniel Harper, I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened to the boy. Aunt Linda looked over my shoulder. Do you think we could look him up? The boy, I mean. Maybe find out if he's still alive? Mom hesitated. If Mom thought he wasn't safe, we could be opening a door we can't close. I met her gaze. But don't you want to know? He's family. Mom rubbed her temples. Yes. But we need to be careful. If Daniel is still out there, we don't know what he's capable of. The three of us sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Aunt Linda spoke. If we start looking, we'll have to do it quietly. No one else in town needs to know. Not yet. That night, I lay in bed with my laptop, searching for anything I could find on Daniel Harper and Adoption Illinois 1960s. Most of what I found was useless, old newspaper archives, outdated records. But then, buried in a genealogy forum, I found a post from just a few months ago. It was short, but it made my heart race. Searching for birth mother. Born Springfield, Illinois, 1963. Adopted privately. Told my mother's name might have been Eleanor. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. There was an email address attached. I didn't know if it was him. I didn't know if reaching out would be safe. But I knew one thing, this was the first real lead we'd had. And if I didn't act now, it might be gone forever. I must have stared at that post for half an hour, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The words searching for birth mother were like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. I knew I should talk to Mom and Aunt Linda before reaching out, but a part of me worried that if we waited, this person might disappear. So I typed a short, careful email. Hi, my name is Claire Carter. I think we may be related. You mentioned in your post that your birth mother's name might have been Eleanor. I believe Eleanor May Carter, maiden name unknown to me, may be the person you're searching for. Please let me know if you'd like to talk. I hit send before I could second guess myself. The next morning, I woke up to a reply. Claire, my name is Michael. I've been looking for my birth mother for years. I was told she was young, left her first husband, and gave me up to protect me. If your Eleanor is my Eleanor, I think we need to talk. I live about 2 hours away. I can come to you. My hands shook as I read the message. 2 hours. He was practically a neighbor compared to what I'd imagined. I told Mom and Aunt Linda over breakfast. Mom's face went pale. You reached out without telling us? She asked. I had to, I said. What if this is him? The boy in the locket? Don't you want to know? Aunt Linda leaned forward. If he's telling the truth, yes. But if Daniel Harper is still alive and somehow connected to him, we're walking into something dangerous. In the end, we agreed to meet Michael, but in a public place. We chose a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind where everyone's too busy with their laptops to pay much attention to strangers. When Michael walked in, I recognized him instantly from the picture in the locket. The same eyes, though now framed by faint lines, the same sandy hair, though streaked with gray. He looked around until he spotted us, then made his way over. Claire? He asked. I nodded. This is my mom, Susan, and my aunt, Linda. We all shook hands, and then we sat, the air thick with 100 unasked questions. Michael pulled a worn leather folder from his bag. I don't know much about my birth mother. My adoptive parents told me she was in a dangerous marriage, and that giving me up was the only way to keep me safe. I didn't even know her name until last year, when I got access to some old legal documents. He slid a faded paper across the table. It was a birth certificate. His, though parts were blacked out. Still, one name was visible under Mother. Eleanor May. Mom's eyes filled with tears. That's her, she whispered. Michael swallowed hard. I don't know what happened after she left me. But about 10 years ago, a man came looking for me. The three of us froze. He said his name was Daniel Harper. Michael continued. He claimed to be my uncle. He told me my birth mother had died years ago, and that he was the only family I had left. But there was something about him. Something that didn't feel right. He asked a lot of questions about where I lived, who my friends were, whether I had kids. I never told him much. He creeped me out. A chill ran through me. Did he ever hurt you? I asked. Michael shook his head. No. But a week after he showed up, my car was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except for an old photo of me as a baby. I'd kept it in the glove compartment. I can't prove it was him, but... He trailed off. Mom glanced at me and Aunt Linda. If Daniel was looking for him, maybe that's what Grandma meant when she wrote that he wasn't safe. Michael nodded slowly. I think she was trying to find me. Maybe to warn me. But if she did, she never got the chance. We talked for hours, piecing together fragments of the past. Michael had been raised by a kind couple who'd moved around a lot for work, which might have kept him out of Daniel's reach for years. But the thought that Daniel had still found him once, and might try again, hung over all of us like a storm cloud. At one point, Michael looked at me and said, You know, for years, I thought my birth mother didn't want me. But hearing all this, I think she loved me more than I ever realized. That hit me hard. Grandma had carried his picture for over 50 years. She'd kept it close, even when it would have been easier to forget. Before we left, Michael gave me his phone number. I want to know more about her, he said. And I want to be part of your lives, if that's okay. But we should be careful. If Daniel is still alive. The thought hung unspoken between us. When we got back to Grandma's house, Mom sat on the couch, staring at the letters spread out on the coffee table. What now? Aunt Linda asked. Mom picked up the photograph of Grandma and Daniel. Now we find out if he's still out there. Because if he is, I don't want him anywhere near Michael. That night, I lay awake, scrolling through online records and news articles, searching for any trace of Daniel Harper. Most of the hits were too old, too vague, or about other people with the same name. Then, just past midnight, I found it. A mugshot dated 7 years ago. Daniel Harper, arrested in Missouri for assault. He'd been in his 70s at the time, but his eyes, the same cold, calculating eyes from Grandma's photo, still burned with a dangerous intensity. The article didn't say if he'd been released. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. If he was out, he could be anywhere. The mugshot wouldn't leave my mind. Even in his 70s, Daniel Harper still had the kind of face that made your stomach twist, a mixture of charm and menace. I didn't sleep that night, lying in bed imagining him walking into our small town, knocking on Michael's door, and smiling like he had every right to be there. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep what I found to myself. I showed Mom and Aunt Linda the mugshot over breakfast. Mom's hands tightened around her coffee mug. If this was 7 years ago, and he was in his 70s then, he's probably in his 80s now. Which doesn't mean he's harmless, Aunt Linda said sharply. Men like him don't just change. Michael came over later that afternoon. We sat at Grandma's old dining table, the letters and locket spread between us like the pieces of a puzzle we were still trying to fit together. I think we should assume he's alive, Michael said. When he came to see me, he didn't act like someone ready to give up. He acted like he was still owed something. Owed? I repeated. Michael nodded. He told me that my mother had taken everything from him, that she'd ruined his life. I think, in his mind, I'm part of what she took. The room felt suddenly colder. I remembered one of Grandma's letters, the one where she said she feared what he would do if he found out she was pregnant. Maybe to Daniel, Michael was never a son. He was leverage. We decided to visit the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Grant was an old family friend, a solid man with a calm voice who'd known Grandma for decades. He listened quietly as we told him about Daniel, about Michael, and about the letters. When we showed him the mugshot, his jaw tightened. I've seen this man before, he said slowly. Not here, but a few towns over. There was talk that he'd been staying with a distant cousin after his release. No official address, though. The man likes to disappear. Is he dangerous? Mom asked. The sheriff hesitated. Let's just say, if Eleanor went to the lengths she did to keep him out of her life, I'd take that as all the proof I need. I'll put out some calls. If he's nearby, I'll know. That should have been reassuring. But the next night, everything shifted. It was just after 10 when Michael called. His voice was tight, urgent. Claire, someone's been outside my house. I saw him through the blinds. Tall, gray hair, wearing a long coat. He was just standing there, watching. My stomach dropped. Did you call the police? I did. But by the time they arrived, he was gone. We drove to Michael's that night, Mom, Aunt Linda, and I, our hearts pounding the whole way. The street was quiet when we arrived. The kind of quiet that makes every shadow feel like it's hiding something. Inside, Michael was pacing. I know it was him, he said. Even after all these years, I recognized his eyes. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out the locket. I think it's time you had this, she said, pressing it into Michael's palm. He looked at it for a long time before opening it. His breath caught. She kept this all these years? She never stopped thinking about you, I said softly. Michael swallowed hard, then looked at Mom. There's something you should know. When he came to see me years ago, he said something strange. He told me my mother had hidden the real truth in something she carried. I thought he was just trying to scare me. But maybe he meant this. We examined the locket closely. The pictures looked normal at first glance, but when Michael ran his finger along the edge, something clicked. The back of the locket popped open, revealing a paper-thin compartment. Inside was a folded piece of paper, so fragile it looked like it might crumble. Michael unfolded it carefully. It was a birth certificate. Not his, but mine. What is this doing here? I asked, my voice shaking. Mom leaned in, frowning. Claire, that's not possible. Your birth certificate has always been. She stopped, her face draining of color. Oh my god. The certificate listed my name, my birth date. But under father, it didn't have my dad's name. It had another name. Daniel Harper. I felt the world tilt. No. No. That's wrong. That has to be wrong. Mom grabbed my hand. Claire, listen to me. He is not your father. He's not. But Eleanor must have known something. Maybe he tried to claim you somehow. Maybe. Michael's face was grim. This is why she hid it. Because if he ever found it, he could have used it to get to you. The realization hit me like a wave. All those years, Grandma hadn't just been protecting Michael, she'd been protecting me too. Before we could process it further, a noise outside made us all freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving past the window. Michael moved to the door, peeking through the peephole. His face went pale. It's him. Mom reached for her phone, dialing the sheriff, but before she could speak, a voice came from outside, deep, smooth, and chilling. You can't hide forever, Michael. Or you, little girl. You've got something that belongs to me. The locket. We stayed silent until we heard the distant wail of sirens. By the time the sheriff arrived, Daniel was gone again, melted into the night like a shadow. The sheriff promised to step up patrols, to keep watch. But I knew it wasn't over. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to give up. In the days that followed, Michael stayed with us. We kept the locket hidden, and I found myself holding it sometimes at night, running my fingers over its worn surface. Grandma's secrets had changed everything I thought I knew about her and about myself. But they had also shown me the length she went to protect the people she loved. One evening, as the sun set over Maplewood Street, I whispered to her memory, I know the truth now, and I'll keep us safe, just like you did. For the first time since opening that trunk, I felt a little less afraid.